Hi everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo with another video in the ongoing series, Frank Zappa, one album at a time. And this time we are up to, we are up to release number 27. And that is this one here, Orchestral Favorites. All right, this is the discrete release. That was issued in May 1979. And it is, as the title suggests, it is orchestral pieces. And it was part of the bundle of albums that was turned into Warner Brothers, which Frank, turned in along with the Live in New York, and also the other albums that were in this bundle included Studio Tan and Sleep Dirt, which I have done videos on previously, all in what he believed to be his contractual obligation to Warner Brothers, and they sat on it. And then that's when he threatened to, go off and just superficially, that's how the whole Leather project, came to be. But then Warner Brothers attempted to, assert their control, and then they started releasing the material. And with this unauthorized cover art that was done by the same artist for not only Orchestral Favorites, but for Studio Tan and for Sleep Dirt. So here is the, original on the discrete label. And then you can see too that, there wasn't a lot of information. There's just the track listing, but there's no information about the people in the orchestra, or anything else, when and where they were recorded, because this was issued in 1979. And the live performances are actually dating back to 1975. Now, there was a 2019 reissue in which the original analog tapes were remastered by Bernie Grundman, and that was this. Different art, although, the long and short of it was Frank really, he objected to the fact that Warner Brothers did what they did. He was not, as far as I can tell, he was reasonably okay with the cover artwork. But again, we get some new artwork, plus we get a gatefold album that has much more information about the members of the orchestra, which I may have a difficult time pronouncing the Abnucios Emuka Electric Symphony Orchestra, which is something that Frank brought back together because this is the same orchestra name that he used with the orchestra parts for Lumpy Gravy. Now, the original live sessions were recorded in Royce Hall at UCLA in September of 1975. And some interesting things about this, and by the way, with the new one, we also get, the Zappa Records label. So we have it on this side, and then we've got the photo and the label here. One of the interesting things about the musicians, because it was a smaller orchestra, the musicians doubled up on instruments and kind of the style of jazz musicians. So, for example, maybe one person, their primary instrument that they would be playing in an orchestra would be, an oboe. And if they didn't have any oboe parts for a period, they would just sit there and wait until their, next time would come in. but Frank had people, if you played oboe, you might also be playing saxophone or bass clarinet or something like that. So he had people playing, additional instruments, to accommodate all the different things that he was trying to do. Now, the musicians were very excited, about this project. And I've got a few quotes here. And the first one, a very brief quote, is by Earl Dumler, who played oboe, English horn, and baritone oboe. And he said, this was a very special project. Some of the best young talent in LA was part of it. We're old now. And then we have a bit of a longer quote from Victor Morasco, who played clarinet, alto sax, and flute. And he said, these concerts are standouts in my entire time in Los Angeles in terms of challenge, dedication, and sense of doing something other than making money and fun. When it was over, we returned to our steady jobs. I said to Earl Dumler, I feel like a kid who has been to Disneyland for 10 days and now we have to go home. So the musicians, at least some of them apparently really, really enjoyed this whole experience, both of the live performances, and then there were quote unquote live performances, but they were closed performances, and that's all what goes into what is on the record. This entire project happened because of the financial success of Apostrophe. This was Frank's first gold record, and even though it was released earlier, shortly afterward, Overnight Sensation also went gold. So he had, he had some money, and he banked some of it, and then he set about creating this project to get this music done. So some of the material already existed, and much of it would come from, for example, 200 Motels, excuse me. And the opening track is Strictly Gentile, and it opens with this very, very lovely piano, and I'm going to emphasize this new one. I mean, the original sounds good, but this remastered one by Bernie Grundman, wow, this is the one to have. Very, very noticeable sound quality difference, better separation, and better clarity with some of the other instruments, because you were talking about an orchestra. So, depending on, where mics are and where different musicians are, in reference to mics, not everybody is getting mic'd. So the remastering did a fantastic job of pulling out these other instruments that may not be so easily heard on the original release. So anyway, Strictly Gentile, from 200 Motels, very famous work by Frank, also in the London Symphony Orchestra recordings, and this one was taken from a Royce Hall live performance from September 18th, 1975. There is some harmonica parts in this that are very cool as well, but they're overdubbed. All right, they were added later. And then, when the orchestra kind of fades out at the end of Strictly Gentile, and you normally get the closing part, the closing benediction part or whatever, like what occurred in 200 Motels. During the performance, you would get Frank playing guitar and Captain Beefheart playing alto sax, but on this recording it fades out, and then that performance part is removed. So you would have had to have been there to hear that. Then comes an original piece to go with this program, and that's Pedro's Diary, which is a ballet. And a really interesting story here, some comments, by Frank about this. He told an interviewer, I really needed a vacation and even had a room reserved at a hotel. Then I decided I would do the Royce Hall concerts. So I sat down in my basement workroom and started writing Pedro's Dowry. I was really involved, 14 to 18 hours a day for 3 weeks. I haven't felt that good in years. I told my wife, that's the best vacation I ever had. Pedro's Dowry is wonderful. It may even last as a great piece of music. And this is only the second time I felt this way about one of my own pieces. It's got some neat things in it. So yeah, sat down for 3 weeks to write this out. And when you're listening to the piece, it is absolutely incredible and fabulous, all the things that are going on. This is where, sometimes the orchestral bits, but also the rock and roll songs and many, of the more, the rock-oriented songs, and especially the jazz-oriented songs that Frank wrote. The intricacies and the nuance that he put into when he was writing the music is just really, really fantastic. And Pedro's Diary is no exception. The other interesting thing is that, Frank had a tendency to write music according to a particular musician's skill and personality to a degree. So, for example, the viola, that's a person. The viola, one of the violists, Frank apparently had heard that she was dating a trombone player. So he wrote parts in Pedro's Diary in which the viola and trombone are playing the same part simultaneously. So it wasn't Bruce Fowler that she was dating, but nonetheless, it's Bruce and her, doing this during, the show. The other thing with Pedro's Diary is that at least for me, I really hear the influence of Edgar Varese, because it has these very distinctive percussion or percussive parts with instruments like vibraphone, wood blocks, snares, timpanis, maracas, and other percussive instruments. So you really do hear that influence in there. There are parts where the horns are making these like elephant trumpeting sounds. It's just a really, really amazing and beautiful piece. There are some complexities to it, which I'm not I wasn't a music major or a theory major in terms of how the song is divided into, or the piece, I should say, is divided into these different segments and what the key scores are for the different segments. That's something a little beyond my ken. But it is a really, really amazing piece. And also eventually, did appear on the release known as Leather. The piece ends with party favor, noisemakers. That's something else with the way some of these pieces end. Frank did not go for, like what many composers did, go for endings that, were very clear and, crescendos, climactic. Some of his pieces, they just kind of end, So the next piece on side one is a very short one. It's called Naval Aviation in Art. Okay. It's a very short piece, and the title apparently came from an inspiration from a photo of Navy personnel, and I believe it was a Life magazine from the 1940s, and that was the caption, Naval Aviation in Art. Now, the actual piece is not making, I don't think, any kind of connection. That's just the title. And an interesting part, if you ever saw a live show, or you can hear it particularly with the Oz recording, during the fall tours, fall 75 and the spring 76 tours, at the start of their shows, they would play this piece over the PA system, for the audience. Then we get on side 2, we have a rendition of the Duke of Prunes that has a guitar solo, except for the fact that it's overdubbed, because Frank was saying that you really can't get the volume and the distortion, that he wanted from the guitar while still recording an orchestra. So to get that volume and that feedback that you hear in the guitar solo, it was recorded separately and then overdubbed onto that. And it is the song that originally came from the album the 1967 album, Absolutely Free. Sorry, I'm just a bit distracted because I saw on my other phone I was getting a call, but that's okay. It can go to voicemail. And then we get the closer, a very extended piece of Bogus Pomp, which Frank explains as a parody of the excesses of movie music. It has a lot of different elements of the kind of fake grandeur that you can find in some motion picture scores. So, and expanding upon that, because there's something going on, again, it's referencing the way that he would write music, incorporating skill sets of various musicians. And he said that this tune contains a small war which takes place in the string quartet over here. See, what he would do is he would talk about the pieces, as he introduced them during these performances. It is common theory that the viola player never gets a good solo. I don't know how many latent viola players there are in this audience, but if there are any, you'll identify strenuously with Pam when she jumps up and steps on her wah-wah pedal and takes her alarming solo. Yeah, he had this viola player hook up her instrument to a wah-wah, all right? And, uses that in there. In fact, she talks about this. Pam is her name, Pamela Goldsmith. She said, "It was the first time I had dealt with a pickup, a Barkus Berry in those days, and amp, giant Benson amp. I had feedback all the time, as I remember. I used a combination volume control and wah-wah pedal, and once I was fooling around with it during rehearsal and tried timing it to produce vibrato. Frank came running out, wild-eyed, saying, 'That's it, you have to use that.' So I did. I played barefoot because that was the only way I could feel the pedal underneath my foot. You must realize violists don't use their feet to play, and this was all new to me. I was fresh from Stanford University, having received my doctorate in 18th century performance practice. In the performance, Frank had the string quartet right in front at the edge of the stage, dressed in formal orchestral attire, except for my bare feet. He definitely wrote for individual players, writing more and more difficult passages until you would hit your wall. I remember finally saying to him, 'Frank, I can't play that any faster.' And then he said, 'Okay.' And that was that." And you do hear that. You hear the viola parts in the song where she's playing really fast. And then the wah-wah effect that she employs with it is just really, really striking. This whole Bogus Pomp also contains many elements from the recording ahead of their time, as well as 200 Motels. Probably the 200 Motel parts are really stand out more. I mean, the whole sweet around this town is a sealed tuna sandwich is very recognizable throughout that. But yeah, a great piece. And again, one of those pieces that just kind of, ends. So that's what you have here with orchestral favorites. And as I said earlier, this is the one you really want to get if you don't already have one. If you have the original, I would urge you to get this. And if you get this and don't have the original, you don't need the original unless you're a collector. But this really is a fantastic reissue, fantastic remastering. So that's it. I'll have some links in the down under to my Frank Zappa playlist, in which has my previous videos that talk about the others that were in this leather series, with Sleep Dirt and I always have a hard time remembering the other one, Studio Tan, as well as the New York release. Leave your comments in the down under, please. Like, subscribe. Remember that I am also on Instagram as NewsDude76, NEWZDUDE76. So if you like, you can follow me there. And I am now going to do my new thing, which is to talk about books. I'm going to save my closing, my normal closing, for the very end. But I am going to talk about now some books. So if you don't want to hear about books, that's fine. See you later. I got two books. The first one is a Zappa related book, and this is this one here, Zappa the Hard Way. This was published in 2010, written by Andrew Greenaway, by Weimer Publishing. And what this book chronicles is the ill-fated 1988 tour. This is when bass player Scott Tunis was named the Clone Meister, which is the person who runs the rehearsals and like the first half of the day, I think, before Frank comes in and then works with the band. And there was a great deal of tension with a majority of the people in the band at that time and the way Scott Tunis was running these rehearsals. There was infighting, and this is all described in here. Some of the infighting really was quite juvenile in nature. I mentioned here that I bookmarked this one page because while they were, the first part of the tour, they were in the U.S., in the Northeast and North Central states. Then they were going to go over to Europe. They went over to Europe, and then they were going to come down and finish the U.S. tour. But things got so bad in Europe that Frank canceled all the rest of the shows. But one of the things that was in here is this was for this tour, which was an election year. Frank tried to set up voter registration booths in the lobbies of his U.S. concerts, asking audiences to go register during the intermission. When the band played the Tower Theater in Philadelphia, the registrar of voters, quote, refused to send over voter registration slips because he said we already have enough registered voters. He liked it that way. I thought it was interesting to note that because of recent issues, particularly in Pennsylvania, having to deal with voting. These are not new problems. They've been around for a while. Anyway, it's a good read, very insightful on that. Great chronology of those events. And then my next book, in keeping with Pride Month, is this one here. All right, Dying for Joe McCarthy's Sins, the Suicide of Wyoming Senator Lester Hunt. This book was published in 2013, written by Roger McDaniel and published by Wordsworth Publishing. This is a pretty good book. This is something that I would recommend, regardless of your age, to read and again learn more about our history. And the story is about, all right, we've got Lester Hunt. He was a time the governor of Wyoming, and then he was elected to the Senate in Washington. And he was a very outspoken critic of Senator Joseph McCarthy. In fact, Hunt proposed taking away McCarthy's committee's immunity from lawsuit, which would then allow people to sue members of the committee for slander after having to go through those hearings by the committee. Now, in 1953, so you see already Hunt was on McCarthy's bad side. Now, in June 1953, Hunt's son, who I believe was in either his very late teens or early 20s, was arrested for soliciting sex from an undercover male officer. This is 1953, okay? When that happened, McCarthy and his cohorts threatened that they were going to really publicize Hunt's son's arrest and the whole prosecution unless Hunt agreed to not run for re-election and immediately resign from the Senate. So they were trying to blackmail him out, or they were just going to expose this. They were going to go to the media, and it's 1953. The media would have been all over that, with the whole shaming coverage. But Hunt, at this point, refused, all right? So McCarthy did, they published what they could, but the case was quickly disposed. His son was convicted and then fined in October of 1953. Then Hunt announced that he was going to run for re-election in April of 1954. That's when he announced. When McCarthy and his buddies came back and renewed all these threats unless Hunt withdrew. This time, Hunt agreed to, and then he committed suicide in his Senate office in June 1954. So it was one of the events that eventually led to McCarthy's disgrace. And this is part of the reason why, people in the gay community emphasize the importance of being out. But of course, when you're ready, we understand that this is not something you just you have to do right away. But it is important to work your way to that point, because many of the politicians and the staff members on McCarthy's team were closeted homosexuals. And it wasn't communists that they were going after only. They were also identifying people who were thought to be homosexuals who worked in the government. So here, that was also why eventually many groups were intentionally outing closeted politicians who were taking anti-gay stands. And this is where it all comes up. And that also, besides the Red Scare that occurred in the 50s, beginning in the 40s and into the 50s with McCarthyism over the communists, there was also something known as the Lavender Scare, which was this whole effort by McCarthy and others to expose homosexuals who worked in the government, which that will be a story for another time. So those are my two books, Dying for Joe McCarthy's Sins, all right, which is by Roger McDaniel, and then Zappa the Hard Way by Andrew Greenaway. Both really excellent books. And so I thank you for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed that. And remember, pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.